मैं इंग्लिश में बोलूँ या हिंदी में बोलूँ? I think I can mix the two. Friends, I am very pleased. हिंदी में अच्छा, बहुत अच्छा. यहाँ पे अंग्रेजी नहीं समझने वाले कितने हैं? Those who don't understand English, please raise your hands. Oh, everybody understands English. So कभी-कभी और आप तो इंग्लिश जानते हैं. So I will speak in English. कभी-कभी मैं हिंदी में कुछ बोलूँगा. Thank you. It's a great honor to be here. And I see on the stage democratic rights voices, some of whom I have worked with or interacted for 5 decades. And so I'm very pleased. And to follow Justice Sudarshan Reddy, it's a great honor. I think your 2 suggestions and the whole critique of the paradigm, development paradigm, which has created the present crisis, is a pointer, and I will build upon that. I must say, I was going back to 80, 81, 84, 83, after the Indravali massacre. In the 80s, the term was Girijan, and today the term is Adivasi. So I'm so thrilled that this transition has taken place. Because, I'll come to the context and the repression and all that, but my main point today is about how we have to start a new way of discussing this question. Change this type of discourse. So from Girijan to Adivasi. Because some people are not prepared to accept this term. They use the term Vanavasi. They don't want to accept the term Adivasi. And this is politics of knowledge. There is a disregard to a whole perspective on the history of human civilization or civilization on the planet as a whole. Because Adivasi refers to the original people and they have a civilization. And that civilization was subjected to aggressions by several kinds of people at different points. Today, why it is that only 8.6 or 9%, I think the real proportion would be more than that. But why is it minority? Why other communities acquired skills to expand their population, expand their habitation area, expand their kind of living standards, and called themselves finally civilized, and called the Adivasis uncivilized, within quotes. And remember, the civilizational gradation is the contribution of colonialism. Colonialism and capitalism have 2 major gradations which have polluted our mind, terms of discourse, everything. Gradation of labor and gradation of cultures. I think everybody must keep this in mind. This is why today I am only talking about to fight this regime and regimes like this, to fight repression, not only colonialism, neocolonialism, neoliberalism and capitalism and Brahminism and all the oppressive systems. We have to go to the roots of knowledge and how they appropriated in the name of civilization its resources, economic, cultural, political, all the 3 kinds of resources. And today we are subjected to political violence, economic violence, cultural violence. And I will talk more about the cultural parlance. So Adivasi term has to be kept in view that the original habitants on earth who had certain characteristics, and today we know those characteristics. Their relationship with nature is now enshrined in the Constitution of Bolivia in Latin America as bien vivir. Those of you who use the computer should see it on Google what it means. It means very simple. Bien is good, vivir is living. But good living is defined as what? Humans and nature, how they live together. Humans, one and other, how they live together. Then even, there is no othering. You see, capitalism brought the term other, self. Metropolis is, Europe is the self and colonies are the others. That started self and other debate. I will not go into that just now. So, that's the first point I want to make, that Adivasi term embodies all that goes with the Adivasi civilization. Adivasi civilization. And you know, one of the main points which Ramdayal Munda started discussing, and my late colleague Vinay Kumar Srivastav, who edited the first volume in our series, Social Change in Contemporary India, India's Tribes, the Unfolding Realities. He said, let's not accept the colonial anthropological term describing the Adivasis as unique, and then have either a patronizing attitude as a attitude even of welfare in a modern welfare state. No. Adivasis, like other parts of human society, should be placed in the context of all seen as groups of humans with variety, diversity, and vitality. There are various groups, and they are various kinds. And then we find out how they are related. And this is a relationship of exploitation, and that has to be transformed. That relationship we are trying to transform. You see? So Adivasis has to be seen in a framework of variety, not just uniqueness and separate, who need, you respect, you patronize, you develop, you assimilate, and you civilize them. No. In fact, one of the terms I would like to stress, we, the non-Adivasis, and they, the Adivasis. This we, they framework has to be abandoned. It is only we. And within us, there are various kinds of groups in different political, economic, cultural situations of various relationships. And some of it is unequal, exploitative, oppressive, and complementary, mutual. And this is the other term. This is from Zulu language in South Africa, and I'm so glad today on this day of International Day of Solidarity. That's okay. I have a support here. Sorry, those who have seen me in this hall 20 or 30 years ago would be wondering why he is carrying a stick. This is still working, so don't bother. They have a term which Nelson Mandela and Desmond Tutu picked up, popularized, and made it popular, and basis of their policy of reconciling white, black, brown, those differences after liberation of South Africa from apartheid. And that term is Ubuntu. Ubuntu, I have talked about it in Hyderabad many times. Ubuntu means I am because you are. I cannot exist without you. You see? So that mutuality, we have to rediscover and re-establish and transform the exploitative relationship to relationship of Ubuntu, a Ubuntu relationship, a mutuality, interdependence of equals, not unequals. Interdependence of equal entities who live on the basis of contribution of the other. We don't see each other as self and other, us and them, and then establishing our right to exploit them, saying that this is good for the nation or this is good for the world. Adani, Ambani, Tata, Mittal, all of them are being invited to Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand and Odisha during the last 6 weeks of our new government in Odisha. All of them have landed there again to renew and seek new concessions, you see, because they say it is for national interest. So you have to sacrifice for national interest, not our collective interest. This is not the Ubuntu framework, Ubuntu paradigm of development. This is an oppressive notion of development. This is what Justice Reddy was talking about, how to change that, how to question that, and relook at the Constitution. Friends, therefore the term Adivasi and this layers of civilization, I think you should look at history and find out why Adivasis became minority and so-called isolated. Adivasis are not isolated. In fact, this year, the message from Secretary General talks about those indigenous people, Secretary General of the United Nations. Please go, if I have time, I will go to the history of this day, International Indigenous Peoples Day. He says, this Secretary General says, this year we should focus on protecting the rights of indigenous people, and especially those indigenous people who have chosen to be isolated voluntarily. My thesis is they have already all been interacting. There is no isolated community at all. Very few, because they have not been reached somehow. That should not characterize our notion of Adivasis as isolated, uncivilized, primitive. No, they have been part of this global society of various kinds of interaction, direct, indirect, multi-layered, and so on. This is very important to know. And we must discover, and colonialism and its reaction, resistance to colonialism has taught us how we have now a new framework to go back in history, pre-colonial, and if as long as we can go back to see the history of the planetary civilization. So civilization is everywhere with every group of people. There is nothing called more civilized and less civilized. It is colonialism which created this gradation of civilizations, along with gradation of labor. Manual labor is low, mental labor is high. I think that's another subject. I will not talk about that today. Now, I said that the context has to be therefore put in this larger aggression on civilization. And what we learn from the Adivasi revolts during the colonial period and in independent India are three things. From Birsa Munda-led revolution, and from Alluri Sitaram Raju-led revolution. These two revolutionary movements actually were revolutionary movements, not just tribal revolts. You see? So in the history of revolutionary movements, it has to be put like that. What was Birsa Munda's slogan? And that term has to be accepted and popularized all over the country, not only among Adivasis, everywhere, in all discourses. Ulugulan. How many have heard or used the term Ulugulan? Please raise your hands. Very few. This is India's most alive city. I have got so many of my ideas and inspirations from this city, this, well, undivided Andhra Pradesh, from PUDR, PUCL meetings. But Ulugulan, which literally means in Munda language, literally means great turbulence, tumult, great uprising. Actually, it is revolution. Upturn, revolution. Ulugulan. So, like Ubuntu, Ubuntu at least is from South Africa, but Ulugulan, we have to, I was going to start my lecture by saying, Jai Ulugulan, or Ulugulan Jindabad, like Inkilab Jindabad, we should say Ulugulan Jindabad. Ulugulan slogan catapulted the whole region, that whole region of Jharkhand. You see? And 1899, 2000. And look, both that as well as the 1920, 22, 24, this Sitaram Raju's revolutionary movement, both were anti-colonial as well as anti-feudal. Because already the jamidars, forest contractors, government agencies, colonial government agencies, they were encroaching on tribal land, tribal forest, and tribal culture, and administrative integration. So, political violence, economic violence, cultural violence was already had onset during the colonial period. So, these two great revolutionary movements have to be remembered in terms of their articulation of the agenda of the rise of the Adivasi civilization. Rise of the Adivasi civilization. You have to see the history of the rise of Adivasi civilization during the last 200 years at least in global history, and 100 years particularly, and last 50 years. And now 30 years since, in 1994, the United Nations General Assembly, first the committee adopted this, and from 94 onwards. And 2007, United Nations Declaration, UN General Assembly adopted the United Nations Declaration for rights of the indigenous people. And India is a signatory to that. So, India government does not regard Adivasis as indigenous people. We always, I learned it from another great activist and scholar, Gladson Dungdung, from Jharkhand, who has written a lot on the Jharkhand movement and the Adivasi future. So, the two things are, India is a party to the UN resolution, declaration, and 2007, and there is a Kailas and versus other Supreme Court judgment where in 2010, where the term Adivasi also appears, and indigenous people also, so they are equated in that whole judgment. So there is a legal recognition of the government of India adopting this also. Adivasi means indigenous people, original inhabitants, you see. And like Dalit term has become an intellectual weapon It is a liberating expression. We today must resolve on this Adivasi Day, on the 30th anniversary of the Indigenous People's Rights Day, because there are 3 decades. This is the end of the 3rd decade of Indigenous People's Rights. On this day, we must resolve that Adivasi term becomes a very powerful political expression, that it indicates the rise of the Adivasi civilization. Unfortunately, it has not become, because we have not. There are 2 reasons. One is the extent of oppression politically, economically, and culturally, which is reflected in universities. For example, now Dalit studies are in all universities, thanks to the initiative that Thorat and others took about 20 years ago. But Adivasi studies are still not there in all universities. It should be. And just because they are only 9 or 10%, I mean, if you have this view of history, how important it is to understand society, civilization, and whole process, and the economy and culture, because so-called non-Adivasi culture, I mean, if you study language and culture of Adivasis, and I mean, this was one of the things B.K. Roy Burman, Ramdayal Munda, they were always telling us, and contemporary tribal linguists, some of them, are telling us how much language and culture are interrelated. Tribal languages have enriched the so-called, Sanskritic or Tamil-based languages. Therefore, this is my urge that the term Adivasi has to become a politically potent term, having a civilizational context and thereby leading us to make political, economic, and cultural demands. I want to quote the Secretary General on something which I think should be kept in mind. Incidentally, every year the UN also announces a specific task. And for 2024, the UN has asked people all over the world to make it a year of protecting the camelids, camel and camel-like animals who are so crucial to Adivasi indigenous people's life, both in cold as well as in hot climate, both in deserts as well as in mountains. And there are small goat-like things with camel bent goats with, and the resolution says they are for agriculture, they are for food, they are for milk, etc., and they are also for their skin and they shed hair from that, so also industrial use. So protection of camelids is this year's focus. But more importantly, the term exploitation and alienation of tribals has to be understood not only in terms of resource or mining. Mining is only the most obvious dimension of this exploitation. It is resource, it is land, it is language, it is culture, and it's entire system, the entire political, economic, cultural, ecological environment, and destroying the basis of the history of planet, which lies on coexistence and interdependence of the living species and nature, forest and humans, forest and animals, and so on. So the paradigm that Justice Reddy was talking about. It's actually the industrial revolution paradigm which colonialism brought to colonies. And our nationalist leaders wanted to do more than Europe, to catch up with Europe and do more than Europe. That is exactly what China is doing today. Not only to catch up with America, now it is already number 2, but it will become number 1 very soon after 2040 or 2045 by this paradigm of development. You see, socialism is only the scaffold. It is really this industrial development. And that model has not only dispossessed, I'll make a slight digression, and David Harvey has wonderfully presented and popularized this term, modern capitalism, how it leads to politics of dispossession, and we apply that to tribal areas very much, politics of dispossession. It is more than that. It is politics of disentitlement. When I first used that for the Odisha tribal in 1980s, some people said, what do you mean? I said, yes, the constitution gives them some rights. In other words, they have some entitlements. Now the FRA, despite all its weaknesses, gives them some more rights. And there are judicial decisions and so on. In our Weapon of the Oppressed, there is a whole section on Adivasi rights. You see? Now a new edition is coming out. So those rights are being taken away, not only possessions. Now the claims, which, those possessions have become legalized, some of them to some extent. It is politics of deliberately disentitling them from those possessions. You see? So what we achieved through struggle in constitution and law, they are neutralizing that. Not only by replacing laws and interpreting those very laws against the spirit of those laws as regime after regime, particularly this regime does, but also actually implementing different kinds of paradigm, different kinds of laws, rules, and the 22 rules was a good example that Justice Reddy gave. So it is not only politics of dispossession, politics of disentitlement to, and therefore, on this day, B.K. Roy Burman had organized a seminar. We held it in DCRC in 1997. I had a brief paper called Right to Earth. In other words, indigenous people have a right over the resources of that area, and this right includes their way of protecting the earth. In other words, right to earth includes rights of earth. Even rivers, forests have rights. Now, thanks to some of the progressive elements in our judiciary, they also talk about right of Ganga. The Ganges River has rights. And in Latin America, this has been already last 20 years, they have been talking about rights of nature. And now in Australia and in Scandinavia, new judgments have also acknowledged rights of rivers. In other words, earth has rights. There is a whole book, Critique of Human Rights. He says, why only rights of humans? Rights of other species, including other components of earth. We should get that book. I was absolutely flabbergasted when I saw the cover, and there is a poem criticizing human rights. So for all of us, right to earth includes rights of earth. So, and indigenous people have an inherent commitment to Ubuntu, that is sharing. But they will like to share with others on mutually agreed terms, not on your terms in the name of national interest. You need an Adani bauxite mining in Koraput. Adani did not have, Adani only owned the Dhamra port in Odisha. Some 10 years ago, they started coming to Odisha in the mine sector, and they are now in a big way in the bauxite mining sector. So not only in Chhattisgarh and Jharkhand, but also in Odisha, Adanis are now big. Ambanis were already there. Now, therefore, so this politics of disentitlement, we have to oppose. Politics of dispossession, politics of disentitlement. Because we are now defending rights, right to earth of people, and in this case we are talking about people of the area, indigenous people, who have been particularly subjected to multiple aggressions. How many more minutes will you give me? No, whenever I ask this to Lakshman, go on. No, sorry. 10 minutes? Okay. So, I think the UN message you will read, and I will skip that. But do remember the point about politics of name, Adivasi. Not Mulabasi, not Banabasi, okay, Adivasi. And how to make it in the same way as powerful a term as, because Dalit Panthers really made it powerful in the 70s, they began. I remember the Dalit Voice magazine, you see, and from then to Chandrasekhar Azad, we have seen this whole trajectory of Dalit movement. Therefore, the same history, Adivasi term was popularized by the Jharkhand movement of Jaipal Singh. By the way, you know why many tribals acquired the surname Singh? Some of them were inspired by the Sikhs, you know, Bhelar in the, but they wanted to not to be seen as, you know, those aborigines from somewhere. They wanted to be, not to be distinguished. Like Biharis started dropping their caste names, you see, as if that would really hide their caste. It did not. So that is the origin of Singh in tribal areas. And I learnt it again from Gladson Dungdung, but he quotes Rai Burman and Ramdayal Munda. I think Ramdayal Munda must be right. He has done maximum research on that area. Okay. So, one is that. I will just now talk about our tasks. In the last decade, 3 things have happened, and we have to confront that. The patronage and welfare strategy had gone on. From patronage to really more of welfare during the Congress regimes in one form or the other, thanks to Nehru's Panchashil, and everybody knows that. Hamindorf and Bherier Arvind, you know, their influence and so on. In other words, respect tribal culture, but gradually modernize them. You know. Modernize still, you see. And then neoliberalism came, and that modernization acquired the neoliberal term. And we know this history of dispossession. But 3 new things have happened during the last 10 years, which we have to recognize. One, the work started by Saraswati Sishu Mandir movement from initially from the 60s, but more in the 70s, and aggressively from 80s when the Ram Janmabhoomi movement started. Saraswati Sishu Mandir from primary stage moved to full school stage. The education and Nanaji Deshmukh's social welfare work in tribal areas, which started in the 70s in Jharkhand and Odisha, then in Chhattisgarh, and then in all the tribal areas of India, Banvasi Kalyan Sangh or Parishad, Ashram. And so that took up this cudgel against the missionaries. So here we have a mission which is better, cheaper, and more pro-poor. So that strategy got a political articulation and a fillip in course of the Ram Janmabhoomi movement, and then the BJP translated that strategy as its party cadre building movement, which helped it to come to power. So please see the cultural 50-year-old, 100-year-old, RSS is 100 years old. 100-year preparation is there. I don't want to go to that history. I think Samsul Islam has done it marvelously. I want to only talk about this phase. So that now has converged with the state policy. So the cultural policy of the Indian state under the Modi regime has now translated the education and culture agenda into the state agenda through NCERT, university appointments, curriculum change, new education policy, and so on. So that's one. So we are not fighting a separate cultural organization, etc., etc. I mean, the lift of the ban on government officers joining RSS, is only one indication of this, but there are so many. So this is one. Second, the money that BJP got from the big industry, monopoly industrialists, Adani, Ambani, Tata, all of them, they channeled in a big way to tribal areas and propagated the thing that this is for development of the tribal areas. So more scholarships, more Ekalabya schools, and also more plants and mines and those things. More train lines, more infrastructure, and so on. So the development agenda had this dual strategy. Gave the impression that this regime is focused on developing the so far neglected areas, and in the process also bring the big corporate sectors. And therefore the agenda of this conference, we have to challenge this corporate loot of Adivasi areas, is very important. So this is number two. So the cultural, long-standing cultural program becoming the state cultural policy. Second, the new development impetus under the BJP regime in tribal areas. But the third one, and that brought tribal chief ministers in Chhattisgarh, Odisha, and so on, into power, and so on. But the third is most interesting. Symbolic appropriation of names, movements, institutions. We have a Janajati Gaurav Divas now. They don't observe today's day. Even though Government of India is a party to indigenous people's day, there is no government program today. You see, therefore I am so glad. I couldn't come to the student convention, I couldn't come to the 50th anniversary of APCLC, but I thought I must come to this. This is so important. It's at a very critical juncture of our history. We have to intervene very, very clearly and effectively to challenge this corporate loot of people of India. And that is Janjati Gaurav Divas, Birsa Munda statute, and state museums which were very small. Now They have got huge grants to become tribal museums, including one in Delhi. Of course, the national one in Ranchi is becoming larger. And so many times more than Bharat Bhavan. Bharat Bhavan became Roy Burman and Chakravarti, Kalyan Chakravarti, Ramdayal, I mean, some of them participated in shaping the Bharat Bhavan as a tribal thing in Bhopal. But Modi regime has done much more to museumify the Adivasi, the Vanavasis in their framework. Museumify. In other words, bring them as, museum models. They have nice things. Learn from this, that. Not treat them as a civilization which is part of the great history of human civilization, great history of the planetary civilization. Therefore, friends, our task is to confront this regime and the other regimes, other parties before. They have been party to this paradigm. And they are all guilty of leading us on this path to destroy the planet by destroying the rights of the Adivasis. And therefore, we have to unite, change the terms of discourse, change the way of discussing about Adivasis, make the term Adivasi a powerful political concept, and talk about the rise of the Adivasi civilization to assert rights of people on earth. Thank you very much. Jai Ulugulan.